Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm super happy because I have the opportunity to be with Regan Rodriguez, founder of Worthy Futures, as well as multiple other companies you're participating in, and you're having a global impact. You've raised a lot of capital for the projects you're going in, so I have the opportunity today to investigate maybe how you got to where you're at, the challenges along the road, and I'm really happy to be
Sure,
able to
yes,
spend
I,
this
I
time with
am
you.
as well. So let's get started.
Okay. So,
Mhm.
Regan, first of all, what got you started in your journey into wealth management?
I've never had a journey of wanting to be in wealth management. Let's just be clear on that. When I think of that, I think of traditional financial planning or putting money in a market that would then produce compound interest. That's not me. I just think there's other guys and gals that probably do that better than me. That's not me. So I've never had an interest in that. What I have had an interest in is financing specifically towards startups, construction projects, sustainability, alternative energy. Again, I want to make my job easier. So, why am I going to contact somebody that maybe already has a financial planner and try and convince them to leave them and then go to me? That's just not me. I'd rather work with somebody that says, "Look, I'm hungry. I've got this situation. I got to get funding. I've been turned down by several banks. I don't know what the situation is." That's where I get involved.
Yeah. And you've been helping companies and having impact across the world. I really wanted to focus with you on today's episode and what you're doing with Worthy Futures. Um, Especially you've been doing Worthy Domes as well, of what I've been seeing. So you're having a good impact in some communities. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what you're doing with Worthy Futures?
What we're doing with Worthy Futures, we're growing trees for profit, right? So the focus is we care about the planet, people, and then profitability. So we're growing trees for impact, for the environment, and we also benefit from carbon credits from that.
Yeah. And how do you specifically grow the trees? Are you working with communities
I'm
in certain
not.
geographics,
No.
in certain
So I'm
geographies?
raising the capital to buy land, and then we plant
Yeah,
the seeds on that land, and then we watch them grow. It's
yeah.
the fastest growing tree in the world, known as the Empress tree, the Polonia tree. It'll go 30 feet in
Yeah.
the air within 1 year.
Wow. And what I really liked about Worthy Futures is you also have the concept of the impact fund in it. And so it's not only once that people, get to reap the profits of what they're investing in Worthy Futures, you have a system to multiply people's impact.
And the reason why I came up with that is I realized it's a long hold, right? We have to wait for the trees
Yeah.
to mature, and then we're going to harvest that.
Yeah.
So I just thought to myself, I put myself in, as if you were investing in it, right, in the shoes of that investor, and I thought, if I put money in here and I'm thinking it may take 3 to 5 years before I get that dividend check, I don't want there to be that objection of, gosh, there's a long hold. So through the Impact Foundation, you're right, the person puts money in and they get to deduct it off of their taxes because it goes into a foundation. Then the funds get
Yeah.
wired to Worthy Futures Corporation, and then those funds go to pay for the actual seeds, the actual plants. And then 3, 4 years from now, when the profits are made and that investor gets dividends, then obviously that they would pay taxes on.
Yeah. It seems to me like you're very sophisticated and knowledgeable in the finance space. How did you get to that point?
I
Who has
didn't know
been,
that I was. If I may ask, what is it about me seriously, that you think is sophisticated? Because I think it's pretty simple, but go ahead. I'm curious. What's sophisticated?
What what I think is interesting is your strategy of investing with the impact fund. It's a great way to multiply dividends as well as multiply the impact. And it also goes through a foundation and then a corporation, which I think it is a very smart and logical model, which I don't think necessarily everyone has thought about. That's why
Yeah,
I think it's nice.
I thought of I learned certain things along the way and kind of put a lot of those together for this. So, for example, might have been about 20 years ago, somebody told me about a donor advised fund. I had never heard of that word. Do you know what a donor advised fund is, Robert? So let's assume you were to sell, let's assume you had a manufacturing plant and you sold it and you walked away with 10 million and you realize, gosh, I'm going to have to pay all of these capital gains taxes. So let's assume you take 1 million of that or 2 million. You say, I'm going to take 20% and you put that into your donor advised fund. Well, now you only have to pay on 8 million, not 10, because you put that 2 away. So you got to deduct that. But you then say, I'm not sure what charities to give it to. Now that my wife and I, you'd say, are retired and we sold our manufacturing plant, what nonprofits are we going to give it to? So now that you're semi-retired, you and your wife can go visit and fly and visit these, I mean, fly to the destination of where these nonprofits are, or drive there if you're wanting to pick local ones, meet that executive director, meet the people on the staff, find out what they do with the money. And then later, when you get back home, you say to your wife, well, what did you think? Did you like that? And if she says, well, I didn't like this part. Okay, well, we write that down. But you know what? I really like this part. Yeah, I really did as well. And so then next week, you go to another nonprofit and you go visit with them. And maybe you have lunch with the executive director. And you are going to be very strategic on what you put. So let's assume it's a month now and you visited 6 nonprofits and you've narrowed it down to really just one. Well, you may not give all the $2 million on that one because you want to enjoy the joy that comes out of giving. So you might only give 300,000. So when it's a donor advised fund, they're called your granting. You issue out a grant. From there, you may do another 100,000 here, another 50,000 over here. So also that donor advised fund collects interest while it's sitting in your account. So you're being a good steward of your money by not just throwing that money out there blindly. You're taking it seriously on how you're going to give, and you're going to be a good steward of that money. So it all came from when I learned what a donor advised fund is. I then met other people that put money into a donor advised fund. Then in 2010, I was introduced to a very great person. I'd rather not mention their name. And that person got me introduced to a donor advised fund. So from there, I've been to other philanthropy conferences where I've picked up, learned things. Where I really learned is outside in the hallway, not at the seminar. I go outside to maybe grab a cup of coffee. I go in line to grab something to eat, and I just happen to be in front of somebody, behind somebody, and somehow coincidentally a conversation gets started, or I go to grab a napkin or more sugar for my coffee. I put a lot of sugar in my coffee. Okay. And from there, a conversation might start. And that's where I've learned a lot of these things, is from the outside hallway conversations at seminars, not what I've learned at a seminar. Then again, maybe I would, if I listened when I'm at the seminar, I'd probably learn. But, and I'm not being funny, I actually learn more. I'm more conscious about listening the hallway conversations I have at seminars I go to. I actually went to a seminar once in DC. It was a 3-day seminar, and you paid for it, and so you were given a ticket. And when you give the ticket, then you go in. And I never gave the ticket because I had a conversation with someone on the outside. Then another came in there. Then someone said, let me introduce you to somebody. And I really went 3 days and I learned so much, had tons of notes just by the outside of the seminar. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. It's fascinating. I just came back as well from a capital
Hmm.
raising conference this weekend, and they've been raising capital. They're training on how to raise capital. So it's really fascinating. But I agree. Sometimes the side conversations are the most valuable ones, and the connections and the actual relationships that come out of those gatherings are really
Oh,
great.
yeah.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Sure.
Regan, I wanted to ask you, who has been one very influential person in your life, maybe, in your youth, or someone who set you on a good trajectory, that you might be able to mention? Doesn't need to be someone you know, but maybe someone who
Sure.
influenced you.
I was thinking of two people, but the better answer would be I'm going to use the name Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, because I was not very good at starting conversations or understanding what the way people are, right? My logic might be different than others. And I remember when I actually picked up that book. It almost sounds like a Dare to Be Great story, but I really was at a garage sale, which is kind of weird. I used to do that when I was a kid. So when I say a kid, I mean, when I was 18, 19 years old on Saturdays, one of the things I used to like to do, majorly dating myself, I would go to the newspaper and look to see where there were garage sales. And I would like to go just to interact. I didn't buy things often, which some people would get skeptical, right? So I'm a 19-year-old kid. I go to a garage sale, which is normally something that somebody that would be older, and I'd come in and just look around. I'd then say hello to the people that are hosting the garage sale, maybe shake their hand, and then leave. And they would think, what is this guy up to? What is he doing? And one day there was this book that said How to Win Friends and Influence People, and I looked and I thought, oh, well. And that was eye-opening for me because some people say that that book is common sense, that there's no common sense to it at all for me. I mean, I remember reading chapter number 1 and I'm like, no kidding, I had no idea. Then I'm going to chapter number 2 when, one of the things that it says in that book is that the person that does the least amount of the talking is the one that's going to be the more interesting conversationalist. And show you what a dum dum I was. If I used to get invited to a party, I used to literally, before I went, write down and I'd say, maybe I can tell this story. Oh, maybe I can talk. And I used to actually write down because I thought if you're the one that does the talking, you're going to be the one that's going to be more interesting. And then also my logic would be, hey, maybe you can throw in a brag here or there because after all, people love listening to a bragger. I do. Then I read the book and it says people don't like boast. I'm like, no kidding. People don't like people that boast or brag. I actually like it when people do it. When someone talks about them, I find that like, oh, that's great. Tell me about another gift that you have. So that book was so when I told you I was thinking of two people, I actually have two close friends. One of them got a book of his right here on my bookshelf. One of the greatest people skill guy I've ever met. Harvey Hook wrote a great book. Very good with people. Okay, when I say very good, I'll never forget my first meeting that I had with him. Soon as we sat down for breakfast, he looks at me and he says, so, tell me about Reagan Rodriguez. And all he did was listen. So then I had another meeting with him, and he's really good at that. So after several years of knowing him, I said, obviously, you've read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And he wasn't joking. He said, I'm sorry, how to win what? And I said, how do this is a book? And I go, yeah, it was written years ago. Oh, I never heard of it. What's it called again? Who is this? Never heard of him. So there's another gentleman, that also has been a big influence in my life. His name is Brent Long. Also very good with people. And I asked him, I said, obviously you've read that book. And he said the same thing. He goes, what book again? And so I said, but how is it that you've never read that book, but you do all of the things that that book says? You know, to me, it just seems kind of obvious that people would want to be heard versus you talking. To me, to him also, it makes sense that if someone has a certain belief or a point, that's one thing that the book says, that if you argue or try and give them logical reasons, do you know what I'm going to say, Rob? The book says that then that person will just be more firm towards their beliefs. And I have to admit, I've read that book umpteen times now. I mean, I'm going to be 50, so I've read that. I reread it almost every year, so I've read it almost 30 times. Every time I read that section, it is so hard for me to read it. Because I'm the type that if I have a certain belief, and then you say to me, yes, Regan, but let me give you this reason of why I think this way, this reason, and then they give me a few good reasons. I'm like, hey, I'm changing my mind now. So that book is very challenging yet important for me to read because my way of thinking or the way I'm wired is different than most people.
Yeah. And I want to dig in a little bit more into that, especially your mindset, the principles that you've learned over the years. You've done a lot of projects that I could see of, and you're involved in wind
Yeah.
farms, you're involved in solar, alternative energy. So you've done a lot of projects, and I'm guessing sometimes you had setbacks, sometimes you had great wins. So, what are the principles that have come up and guided you to make better decisions as an entrepreneur over time?
Let me ask it in this way. Do you have any absolutes in your life that are just very firm, that, speaking of, no one's going to convince you of, because your reality is different than other people's reality based on your experiences? Do you have any absolutes in your life? That's the question. Do you?
I would say a few, but not that many.
Good.
I know that patience is a very, very important value. Um, Patience is a great teacher, and also just recognizing God for me was something very,
Yes.
very important.
So on that note, what I have noticed, what is an absolute, is that if we sow enough seeds, eventually something's going to pop up. So I'm answering your question in this way. I subscribe under the philosophy that those setbacks is also a form of a seed that's being sown into your life, into your career, into your business. So let me explain what I mean by I say even that setback. So let's assume you were you were selling something door to door. Even better example. Even better. Let's assume you were selling, well, I'm giving a very window replacements door to door, right? But instead you were going to apartments that people rent. And you'd say, well, no one is going to buy a window replacement from you. Or another example I'll give, copiers. Let's assume you're selling copiers to, and I'm dating myself, I don't know if people still even do that, and you were doing it at retail stores. Well, that's probably not the best market, right? Those aren't people that make copies like a law firm or an accounting firm. But if you sow enough seeds, something will come up. Meaning, if you knock on rental apartments and they say, no, why am I going to pay for it? I rent. I'm not going to do that. And you go to another, no, I'm not going to do that. Well, eventually someone might have a friend over. And he says, gosh, I wouldn't do that here because I rent, but I've got a friend that's over here and we were just talking about that. Or they'd say, it's interesting, this is my last month here. We're buying a new place and we ended up getting a good deal because the windows were smashed out or whatever that you need. So I do believe that if you sow enough seeds, something's going to come up. So now I'm going to get to your question. I also believe that if when bad things, or what the committee called they would refer to as bad things, that could be a seed as well. So let's assume you're going in on a sales call and you park in this area, you go there, and let's assume either the sale does not take place, or even better, the person you were there to meet with isn't there. And the receptionist says he's not interested or he needs to, and you're like, I drove all the way over here and I didn't even get to present, right? So you feel like you're all dressed up and have nowhere to go. Now that's a seed, right? It's a seed planted, not one harvested, but it is planted. But it still makes you not feel so great. So then you walk over to your car and you know what you notice? Somebody smashed the window or stole, right? Or something got stolen, or you got that unexpected, or what the committee called they would refer to as a bad thing that happened to you. I would get really excited at this point. I really would. Because you mentioned God. Guess who else saw what took place? God saw that. And he also saw it when the person was breaking into your car. So if we're going to believe that God is sovereign, if you really wanted to, he could have made sure that that person didn't break into your car or steal your laptop or whatever it was that happened. His heart could have stopped. God could have had it where a police officer would have been driving by. So, but there's a reason why that bad thing, if you want to call it that, took place. So when you said what those bad things, I later realized ended up being a harvest otherwise.
Wow, that's amazing. I really like that. I really like that analogy. Hmm. And so I see that you've been in the sustainability space for a while now. What really got you in there in the first place?
Wanting to make my life easier. Okay. Meaning in the traditional, well, let's assume we were looking at, okay, I'll give this example, an existing multi-unit apartment. Let's assume that it's at 95% capacity. Makes logical and business sense. You'd think I'm not going to have any trouble getting that financed. Well, if you send that to a large financial institution, what happens is they'll look at it and say, yeah, this is great. This is at 95% capacity. I see that the cap rate is high, but they're going to hold on to it before they approve it because they don't know. Somebody might bring them a deal tomorrow that's at 98% capacity, or even better, might be at 90 but more profitability. And they say, we just need to add more people in and then we'll. So those projects that you would logically think would be easier sometimes take more time. And there are no guarantees. So in alternative energy, I like that because the city, the county, or that country is going to sign that 10-year power purchase agreement. So there's a little bit more security, which again then makes my job easier. And again, I really am about making my life easier.
That's what's fascinating. When we had a chance to have the conversation planning this, you made me realize the different asset classes that were even safer than real estate, because real estate is a popular one, but of course there are cycles as well. And the way you were speaking about your selected investments, I didn't even know that, that really opened my mind, my perspective to these kinds of investments. And it seems like you guys are getting involved, especially in some other countries as
Yeah.
well, if I understood correctly. So working with stable contracts like that seem like they're very stable
Yeah.
investments. I heard you on another podcast, you were speaking about flawed cognition. And I think that a lot of entrepreneurs, it's really about the mindset and the, if we want to say that the highest value real estate is the 6 inches
Mm-hmm.
between your two ears, right? So what do you think is really important when it comes to mindset, cognition, and what do you do to make sure that you make good decisions?
I would monitor what your flawed thinking is. Okay, because I know you asked what exactly is flawed cognition. Well, when you think of things like the 5 second rule, you ever heard that where you drop a piece of bread on the ground and they say,
Yeah.
oh, if you don't, no, dude, if it fell on the ground, it still has germs. So think about how that can carry over into your thought process in business with that. So another thing is when you have this situation that comes up, right? Catastrophizing it, saying, "Oh, this is the worst thing that has ever happened in the history of all mankind." That it's not, okay? It's going to be over in a while, and just right now, it's not the end of the world. I would really just monitor your thoughts. Why do you think that way? And if you do think that way, I do this sometimes. If I have a certain thought and I say, this is how I think, I say, do you really think that way? Why do you think that way? So I would probably just monitor your thoughts a little bit more. See if it's maybe carrying over.
Very nice.
Your flawed thinking is carrying over into what you're doing in your career that's maybe not going well.
Hmm. And I heard also that you don't necessarily like reading business books, because I know that you maybe have read them in the past, apparently in the podcast you were sharing, but you really like different kinds of literature. What are you into these days
I
specifically?
I like poetry. I really like to read poetry, and I get so much out of it. There might be a word or two that I'm able to apply. There are times that I might be stuck on something, and that helps. There's actually a really good book. I thought it was over here on this side of my bookshelf, but I just realized I have it here. This is really good. This guy was a professor of all things,
Hmm.
okay? And he used, of all things, what I see, he worked with the medical students at first at Baylor, also taught medical at Virginia Tech, something like that was there. And what he noticed that there was a difference between those that passed their tests and those that didn't, or their medical boards. He then, that's what it was. At Virginia, he lectured to the law students, and he always knew who were the ones that were going to pass the bar and who were the ones that weren't. And if you were really big into studying and that's all you did, and you studied more than, here's what he said, those that studied the most end up flunking the bar. And those that were like
Wow.
4.0 end up flunking it. And and by the way, I have a friend that's like that. He's a genius, very intelligent, never had to really study. And he did go to law school, thought it was the easiest thing in the world. Then when he went to took the bar, he just over analyzed a little too much. And if you talk to lawyers, they'll tell you, oh, that can happen If you know the law well and then you take it, if you know it very, very well, you'll over and then end up flunking it. So what this book does say is they talk about who are the people. What he did was it's almost like a modern version of Think and Grow Rich. What he instead did was he picked the best of every category. So he interviewed Larry Bird, Magic Johnson. There was no LeBron James back then. He interviewed Tiger Woods. He interviewed the surgeon that operated with Christopher Reeve. He then under attorneys he worked with the what was that guy's name? If the glove doesn't fit, he must have quit. Johnny Cochran. And he thought, what is there one commonality between all of these people? Oh, Michael Dell, he also only found one commonality. Do you know what it is? They've never read a book before. Do you know what the second commonality was? They don't set goals. It's actually, I think the first chapter, it says goal setting is for couch potatoes. He interviewed Michael Jordan, or Larry Bird went to his home. Larry Bird, very mild-mannered, as you know, and it allowed him into his home. First question he asked while he was putting this book together was, what are some goals that you've set? And Larry Bird said, this interview's over. I invited you to my home, but you just offended me. You really did. He's like, he says, why would I set a goal to play basketball? I mean, I'm passionate about that. Michael Jordan answered the same way. He says, I've never set a goal to play basketball. And he says, that's offensive that you would think I'd have to. It's just in me. I like it. And what he found out is that people that set goals for exercising are usually overweight. Because think about it, you can't get yourself on the couch. You can't go to the gym. So you have to set a goal to go there. So what he said was, oh, Michael Dell, he asked, did you ever set a goal? And he goes, I am so glad I didn't. Because when I started Dell Computers, I was in college. If I would have set a goal, you know what I would have done? I would have set a goal to be a millionaire. He says, isn't it a good thing I didn't? Because I accidentally became a billionaire. Same question is on here with Bill Gates. Did you set a goal? Because could you imagine if I did during college? I would have set one to become a multimillionaire. So he says that's the problem with setting SMART goals. It's the same thing with that person that overstudies to take the bar. Think about what you're doing. It's too much and it's specific and it's this. So he gives examples of things like music and how listening to music can help people more, and things like poetry as well. But he does say in the book to stay away from business type books, that they don't help. But I like to read them. But then again, that's also why, I mean, not worth billions, right?
That's super interesting. And I really like the fact that it points out kind of to get in the flow state. I've been studying a little bit more Michael
He's got a
Jordan
whole
as well
chapter
and
on
his way of
this.
thinking.
Yeah. Look him up he's got a CD set that he did. Called Maverick Mindset. Look it up. John Elliott, PhD. Type in Maverick Mindset. And then this was the other book what he's talking about is undermotivated overachievers. I'm sorry, overmotivated underachievers, right? Right? That person
Okay,
that
makes sense.
studies that doesn't get the A's. That guy that is the first to get to work, last one to leave, but doesn't get the promotions. So go ahead, next question. I think we've talked a little too much on that.
Okay, but I really appreciate it. I mean, it's helping people get out of their minds and into their bodies and into action, into their passion, into creation mode instead of getting stuck in thinking. So, um, I wanted to cover with you a little bit more Worthy Futures and your humanitarian fund. So, when it comes to a humanitarian fund, what's the difference? What are people really looking for when they invest in these kinds of funds? And are you attracting general public or is it a different profile?
Mm. Some people care about the job creation, how many jobs it's creating. Others want to know who are the nationalities that are involved, what country is it in. Also want to know, is it a area where there's a great deal of poverty? I think it's more in the area of job creation. Are they helping the least of these? Is it an area where people don't even have clean water to drink? That'd probably be an area where I would people want to get involved. And then to answer your other question, yeah, they are individuals. They are people that are investing in it, not financial institutions.
Very nice. And what do you specifically like about that, being a part of all that?
The conversations around the people that are givers and how they think differently than other people, it challenges me in areas as well. And I get to learn just from, I was going to say their example, but yeah, I think that's best. Is just I learn from those conversations and the way they communicate, which is different from those that just look for a return on investment.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, I see that you're someone who can go really in depth in conversations. And what I really appreciate about you is your ability to speak, your control over your quality of speech. I mean, it's very high, and I really admire that from
You
you.
see the chess that I
Um,
have right here behind me that I have. I tend to play chess in my life too, right? Let's think of the next move and this. I'm very strategic. That's my personality, right? So I tend to play chess with people and life. So with my communication, you're right. I rehearse mentally before I communicate.
it's very it it appears to me very soft, poised, and calculated, and you have great questions, and I respect that a lot. I After our previous chat, I was thinking, I was like, wow, so sharp. I'd love to
Look, have
work on
you ever
that
put your
myself.
foot in your mouth before? I have. Okay. More than one
Oh
time.
yeah.
And so we learn from trial and error. And so you might think, gosh, I
Yeah.
couldn't imagine a guy like you puts his foot in his mouth. Oh gosh, before I used to. And don't beat yourself up about it if you do, because that's a learning experience. So I think that if you have enough experiences where you put your foot in your mouth, it kind of teaches you to maybe think before you speak.
Wonderful. And Regan, on that note, I want to wrap up this episode. You've been giving a lot of great, insightful points. What would you advise maybe a 20-year-old looking to grow as a fund manager, someone who wants to get more into sustainability? What would be your advice to those individuals as entrepreneurs that are growing in the sustainability space? What should they focus on?
Your routine, especially and stay to that routine. And be almost, what's the word I'm wanting to use, uh, unflexible on it. So I'm gonna somewhat exaggerate to prove a point so that you understand what I mean. Exaggerating to prove the point so that it fits in better. Let's assume you go to let's assume you say every Saturday morning, I'm going to go to this coffee shop and I'm going to journal and I'm going to set my goals. And let's assume that coffee shop, again, let's assume you walk there and it's 2 blocks. You go this way and then take a left. And this is your first time you're doing it, but you're setting that routine. and you're walking with this. This is my left hand. And I turn the corner, or I turn the corner to the right, and I switch to this hand. Let's just, now I'm majorly going to exaggerate to prove the point. You run into a friend you haven't seen in a while. He's like, hey, man, but you're right there in the coffee shop. You're going to then turn left here, but you've got it in this hand. Sticks his hand out, says, good to see you. Not today, pal. No rude, but this hand's kind of occupied. Now, see, that's being very anal, because he could have just done this and done this. Being very strict about it. Now you go to the next, and you turn over here, because you turn to the left. Then when you go to sit down, be disciplined on it. Be strict on it. That would be my advice. The other piece of advice is that in life, during your different seasons that you go through, there will be certain times that you're not going to have control over things, because that's the way this world is. Ambiguity of what happens, of what takes place. There are things that are outside of your control. You can get flat tires. You can have, there are things that are outside of your control. And sometimes in life, I don't know if you've noticed this, Rob, that you might have 3 or 4 things that happen. You've heard that expression, when it rains, it pours. Sometimes that happens all at once.
Mm-hmm.
And when that does happen in your life, and you feel like everything's out of control, I have no control over what's happening, you can find one thing. Like, for example, your drawer where your socks are. You can put those socks neatly ordered. And when your life seems like it's in chaos, and let's assume you think about it 5 to 6 times a day about how horrible things are. Good. Those 5 or 6 times when you go to your and open up that drawer, look at those socks, because you've got them in order and in everything perfect, right? That you can control. So find something in your life that you can put in just the perfect way, because when things aren't, you can just go back to that and say, here are my socks in the perfect order.
Wonderful, Regan. Really shifting our perspective on, and what we focus on highly tints our reality. So I really appreciate that aspect of the routine, because it focuses our attention in a specific calendar, and that makes sure that we build on the right things, which you've been clearly doing over decades of building really great projects
Let me
with great people, and also making sure that when things look a little bit out of control, that there are things within our control, and we've got to focus on what we can control, and what is out of our control is in
let
the
me
hands
wrap
of
up
something
with the
greater.
last four laws of focus. What you focus on, you find. What you focus on seems real. What you focus on grows. And what you focus on, you become.
Wow, really
Here's my
appreciate
one.
that. Thank you for your time, Regan. It's been a great episode, and I'm looking
Yes,
forward
me as
to
well.
our next connection.